What's up, comic and pop culture fans? This is James with Mint Hunter Comics. Summer of 2021. Truly a summer I will never forget, full of economic weirdness. I got engaged, a pandemic, I got promoted and hit 10,000 subscribers in the same day, a massive surge of popularity with comic books, lots of rational thinking and peace and harmony between both political sides in America, that Friends reunion special, a massive storm that flooded my home, and so much more. But as a comic book nerd, what I remember of the summer of 2021 was all these $100 and $200 level comic books suddenly overnight bursting into the $1,000 range. So I've been wanting to do this video for a while. We are going to poke and prod and make a little bit of fun at some books that I cannot believe have reached or passed the $1,000 mark. We're going to have a little fun today. I'm going to give you 25 of my choices of books that used to be super obtainable and now are not. I'm going to give each one a rating of a scale from justified all the way to just dumb. I want you guys to pop down in the list below which of the following comics hurt your feelings the most when you realized, ooh, I waited too long. Also, one interesting phenomenon, half of this list are now getting cold. So it's interesting to note that most of these high prices are of the summer of 2021, and some of these are starting to sizzle down again. Let's dive in with number 1, Doorway to Nightmare number 1. The first appearance of Madame Xanadu. This is and always has been an extremely hard book to find due to its quite low print count. There simply are not that many 9/8s. Looking at 2019 sales data, the low sale was at 275, with a high sale at 336. For 2009 numbers, that was pretty respectable. Today's December 1st fair market value of 2021 puts that at an $800 9.8 with a 90-day average sales of about $840. Now, the very last sale hit $1,000. That is a 228% bump from 2019. However, it has been a book that some people were specking on, and I think people really started to notice its worth and the fact that it is pretty darn rare for a nice DC key. We are going to label that as somewhat justified. Next up, we've got Batman, the Harley Quinn one-shot. This is the first appearance of Harley Quinn in DC continuity. This is a 9.8 that I actually used to own, and I remember spending $250 on it, but that was like 2016 or 17. So the 2019 sales data, the lows were at $250, the highs were at about $320, 2 years ago. Today's December 1st fair market value puts that at around a $600 book, with a 90-day average sales of around $700. So yeah, it looks like maybe some healthy growth, although doubled. So what's up with that 1,000? Well, what's interesting is the last few sales have shown several examples that have passed over the $1,000 mark. That's a far cry from that $250 I spent just a few years ago. 270% increase, in fact. $1,000 for that? I think that price is dumb. The next one is another DC before we start doing a massive train of Marvels here, and it's Harley Quinn number 1, the Adam Hughes variant. Adam Hughes covers always demand a high value because frankly, the dude can really draw, and they're just great covers. This one's no slouch either. Even in 2019, the lows for beautiful 9/8 were at $220, whereas the highs was around the $400 range. Today's fair market value puts it at $700, but the 90-day average is much higher at $965. There was one sale in which someone paid $1,200. $1,200 for a non-key? Like many others on this list, that's up to the discretion of that buyer, but $1,200, a 275% increase from a price 2 years ago? Dumb. Inhumans number 5, the first Yelena Belova, the new Black Widow. And this is a book that I actually think, unlike a lot of these on this list, has even more room to grow in recent months due to possibility that she may be on the Hawkeye show. I guess we'll just have to see. Well, in 2019, there was a low sale of $126 for a beautiful 9.8, and the highs were at $350. So that book was kind of all over the place. Looks like by the end of 2019, it had risen in popularity. Fair market value today is $725, already over a double leap. The 90-day average is lower at $620. This is a book that's actually cooled down a bit, but in July, good old July, you'll see that a lot. Someone paid $1,000 for this. Who paid $1,000 on this? Guys, if it was you, pop it in the comments. We gotta have a talk. I have to say though, despite that being a silly price to pay, with the lower-ish print count of this, the fact that there's not an overwhelming amount of 9.8s out there, and with room to grow, I think this one is somewhat justified. Up next, we got Edge of Spider-Verse #2. Obviously, this is one that was gonna go up drastically in the last couple years because of the success of the Into the Spider-Verse movie. Well, this is the first appearance of Spider-Gwen, and in 2019, you could get it for as low as $300. On the high end, you were spending about $500. It has increased 400% with a fair market value of $1,450 and a 90-day average of $1,250 with a July, again, we have July, people were going crazy then. Someone spent $2,000 on this. And you know what? This book still could potentially have room to grow, and of the last decade, it is definitely a notable character. Here's the things that knock it. It's from 2014, and there's a ton of 9.8s out there. I gotta call a $2,000 price on this pretty dumb. Next up, we have Vengeance of Bane #1. This was a $200 book forever. First appearance of Bane. Well, in 2019, it was about a $150 to $250 book. And on eBay, sales tend to be around the $700 range, but there was one Instagram sale that popped it all the way up to a $1,000 mark. First appearance of Bane with a massive amount of 9.8s in existence, catching $1,000? At least in this decade, that doesn't seem quite right to me. This book has definitely started to cool down, so therefore I think spending $1,000 on the first appearance of Bane, a little dumb. Next up, we got Savage She-Hulk #1, first appearance of She-Hulk. This was a book that was in the $300 to $500 range just in 2019. It went up to about a $1,400 fair market value, with a recent 90-day average of $1,300. There have been several that have broken the $2,000 range, which means it's a 425% bump. Now, there are a decent amount of 9.8s in existence, but it's a 40-year-old book. It is a major first appearance. I think this one's going to be the first one on our list that, to me, is justified. I actually think that that book had no business being under $1,000 for as long as it did. That was an underrated key for almost a decade, and now I think it's finally caught up to where it should be. Next up, we have What If? 105, first appearance of Spider-Girl. Great book, not too overwhelmingly many of them, but there's a decent amount. Went for $240 all the way to $350 in 9.8 just 2 years ago. Now, fair market value has since risen to $850. With a 90-day average of $1,100. Now, we got a high sale of the second or third to last. Someone spent $1,500 on this thing. $1,500 from just being like a $250 book? That, my friends, is a 435% increase. That price for a book with that many 9.8s still in existence and not that old of a book, I think that's pretty dumb. Next up, we got Vengeance #1. We're looking at cover A, just the main cover, not that special variant. This is the first appearance of that new Black Knight and the new Miss America Chavez. Well, this book was a $230 9.8 in just 2019. It has risen. This one's a $1,400 average, with recent 90-day sales being at $1,507. And ever since March all the way to today, it's all over $1,200. You can't seem to get it for less. Now that's a 455% increase, my friends. However, yes, it's not that really rare variant, but it is a really big book. I think it's one of the biggest books of the last 15 years. I think it's one that deserves a little bit of attention and had no business being as quiet as it was, so I'm going to label that as somewhat justified. Up next, we got Bloodstone #1, the first Elsa Bloodstone, as well as a couple other notable things. It was a $185 9.8 low, or $275 was the high in 2019. Well, the fair market value now is at $650 with a 90-day average of $900, and there was a recent sale where someone paid $1,300. Now this is a 465% increase. However, a lot of people put a lot of spec on this book, which could mean there are some noticeable things that could happen, possibly tie in to Blade or something like that. So this book, the very low amount of 9.8s that exist, match it with the fact that it could be a prominent book in the future, we're going to put that at a rating of somewhat justified. Up next, we got the first appearance of the Thunderbolts. We got Incredible Hulk $449. This used to be a $160, $200 9.8 just 2-3 years ago. I remember skipping on it. I remember seeing a $150 price tag once and not getting it. Turns out that was pretty stupid, because right now it's an $800 fair market value with a 90-day average of right around that at $809. There were a couple sales in May and June that hit $1,200. Who was spending $1,200 on the first appearance of Thunderbolts, a pretty common and prominent 9.8? That's a 500% increase from just 2 years ago. Man, that price is dumb. Next up, we got a 518% increase, which is Amazing Spider-Man 252, The Black Suit. This was like a $250 into the $400 book for years. Even just 2 years ago, the low was $212, the high was $500 for a 9.8. I myself have had a 9.8. I submitted and got my own 9.6. I submitted and got my own 9.8, and that was a newsstand. Yeah, well, fair market value right now is $1,900. The 90-day average is just over $2,000. That's a far jump from a book that was always in the $300 range. The last 20 sales were all over $2,000. Despite it being a 518% increase, I'm calling it somewhat justified. I think that that's a key that belonged at the $1,000 mark earlier than it actually hit it. Do I think it belongs in the $2,000 range? Absolutely not. I think that is completely silly. But I would call that, in my eyes, I'd kind of view it as a $1,000, maybe even up to $1,400 book. That's a good one. Iron Man 282, the first War Machine, awesome cover. However, are you really going to spend $1,000? Well, in just 2019, you'd be spending about $150, maybe $180. Today, it's got a fair market value of $550, with recent 90-day sales at around $550. So why did someone in July, again, July, spend $1,000 on an Instagram sale? Yeah, $1,000 for a $150 book just from 2 years ago, and the amount of 9.8s that exist to this thing? That's dumb. Next up, we got Amazing Spider-Man 361. However, mine here is a newsstand. We are talking about the direct edition. The first full appearance of Carnage was a $290 to $450 9.8 just 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Well, someone in July of 2021 spent $2,600 on one of those 9.8s. I think we need to have a moment of silence for that individual. Interestingly, this book is now all the way back below $1,000. You can get a 9.8 of Carnage for below $1,000 now. But since it hit it, we have to call it as it is, which is dumb. Looks like the market is finally correcting itself on that book. Next up, we got DC Comics Presents number 27. This was like a $200 book for the last decade and very obtainable. It's the first appearance of Mongol. And then boom, all of a sudden, we've got an average sale of around $2,000 just in the last few months. Wait, so it went from $200, maybe $300 at most, to $2,000? Yeah, that's a 571% jump, my friends. And despite it being one of my favorite keys, that's pretty dumb. Next up, we got Green Lantern 201, our first appearance of Kilowog. And we're talking just the direct edition here. This was a $100 all the way to about a $200 book for the past 5 or so years. Nobody was really jumping on it, which is why the fair market value now is a more appropriate $325. Why then are the only 2 copies on eBay listed at $1,150? I'd like to say that's going to sit, but if someone buys that for $1,150, that could become the new standard for this book. If it does, that's a 641% jump. It was actually doing the research on that book which inspired me to make this video, and I gotta tell you, I love that comic. I think it's a great key, but would I pay over $1,000 for the first appearance of Kilowog? No. Dumb. Young Avengers #1. This has a bunch of first appearances in there. This has always been a big book, but the funny thing is, even just 2 years ago, it was affordable. $200 it was gonna run you, right? Well, now the fair market value's sitting pretty at $1,100. It's got recent sales of $1,100, but it had several that actually reached over $1,500. That's a 650% jump from just 2 years ago. Despite there being a good amount of these, this is the first appearance of everybody. This is a big book, and I think 20 years from now, this is going to be one of those ones that might be the new giant-size X-Men. This one, for me, justified. Next up, we got Amazing Spider-Man #4, the first appearance of Silk. Look at this sales data. This used to be $65 at the low in 2019. The highest price in 2019 was $175 for a 9/8. Fair market value now is $400 with a 90-day average of $356. This doesn't sound like it's anywhere near $1,000, right? Would have been true if it wasn't for July of 2021. Man, what the heck was up with July? What, did everybody get like double stimulus? That's a 692% increase, my friends. Paying that much for that first appearance? No. Dumb. Oh, here's a controversial one. Star Wars #68. This is a classic, beautiful cover. I think it's one of the best Star Wars covers that exist. I think it might be in the top maybe 30 best covers of all time for the medium of comic books. And even in 2019, it was a respectable $250 to $350 book. Don't forget, that used to be a lot just 2 years ago. The market's just crazy right now and we forget. Well, it's got a fair market value right now at $1,850. So the news got out about this book. Plus, throw in, all this talk about Boba Fett, the show. Of course this book was going to climb. Well, the 90-day sales are blowing the fair market value out of the water. $2,475. And we've got a couple sales that did hit $2,500. So guys, $250 jumping to $2,500. This book is looking at a 793% jump. Now, the only reason I'm not going to call this absolutely ridiculous and dumb is that it is one of the best covers ever. There's a good amount of 9.8s, but not an overwhelming amount. So the supply versus the demand is definitely real on this one, I think. I'm going to label this one as somewhat justified. It's a book I would love. Would I pay $2,500? No, you're out of your mind. However, if a friend told me that they did, I think I would understand. Next up, this one I think is the dumbest one on this whole list. I actually need someone to explain this one to me. Wolverine #1 from 1988. That's that black cover, first patch. In 2019, guys, this was a $110 book. Maybe if you got a bad deal, it was $200. I actually got one, unboxed it from CGC. I got the full 9.8, and I think I sold it for $200 in the beginning of 2020 when this book started to climb, and I was happy to do it. Well, it's got a fair market value of $650 right now. I need someone to explain that to me. Recent 90-day sales of $720. I need someone to explain that to me. And there are 4 examples in which someone spent $1,350 on this. Who is buying Wolverine #1 from 1988 for $1,350? What's up with that? Dumb. Next up, Moon Knight #1. This used to be a below $200 9.8 just a couple years ago, my friends. Now, unlike some of these, and like some of these on this list, I think that's a fantastic comic. I love Moon Knight #1. I think it's a great story. Would I spend $1,000 on it? I definitely wouldn't, especially just knowing how cheap it just was. Again, it was under $200. Fair market value right now today, it's at $650. Recent 90-day sales are at $720, and a lot of people are speccing, especially with the movie coming out, because this is that whole first origin where it shows those multiple split personalities. Someone paid $1,800 for it. If it was $1,000, I probably would have labeled this as slightly justified. It's a great book. You'd have to love it. You'd have to love it even more than me to actually pull the trigger. But to spend $1,800 on this, $1,800 is not the right price. Dumb. Next up, we have Batman 313, our first appearance of Tim Fox. I think this book's from 1979, so this one's pretty old, and that's gonna play a factor here. But are you ready for this? I have a personal tragedy related to this, but this book in 2019, in a 9/8, white pages, sure, why not, was $65 as a low, with 158 as the high. It is a book that I have actually owned in a 9.8. It's a book that I sold like 3 years ago. I barely even remembered it until I saw the cover. Yeah, that was pretty stupid, because that's what happens if you just get for the covers. Now I'm more familiar with that book. I know what's going on. It's a great book. I think it's the first Batman and Catwoman kiss, I believe. But it's also the first appearance of Tim Fox, who's the next Batman. So when word got out about the new Batman, this book exploded, guys. Again, that low in 2019 was $65. Well, the fair market value is $1,800 right now. It's got a $2,000 90-day sale, and it looks like the sales are consistently around that $2,000 mark. That is a 1,701% jump, and yet I'm calling it justified. I think people would have had no idea how big of it was if it wasn't for the recent news, but it's kind of cool to see it propel this old, super underappreciated Batman book into the spotlight. Do I think it's going to go down? Honestly, I don't know. There's a few things that make it as spectacular as it is. I also think it's a particularly awesome cover, even though it doesn't relate to Tim Fox or anything like that. I don't know, guys. I'm calling that one justified. Next up, we have Kanan, the Last Padawan #1, first appearance of Sabine Wren, and more. Another Star Wars one on here. This one had some hilarious sales data in 2019. There wasn't much to go off of, but there was a sale for $33. Yes, 9.8, $33. There was another sale for $70. That was the high. Yeah. Well, it's got a fair market value right now at about $350, with a 90-day sale of about $307. This is a book that's actually sunk a little bit, but someone in July, once again, of 2021 must have got a nice unemployment check. They went out and bought it on Instagram for $950. Yeah, it's not $1,000, but it's pretty darn close, and I wanted to include it on this list because it's just the craziest bump of seeing $33, 2 years later, $950. Guys, that is a 1,762% increase. I actually think it's somewhat justified. Star Wars is not going away at all, and I think this book, while I don't think it should be anywhere near the 1,000 point yet, give it 5 to 10 years, I think it'll be there. I usually don't like giving my personal opinions about spec or that sort of thing, but that's definitely one that I think has room to grow, and I think it's a pretty big book. And there's not that many of them, so who knows? The current fair market value of $300, I think that's a lot more fair, though. Second to last entry, we've got West Coast Avengers number 45. I had a feeling, I bet you guys thought that this was going to be on here. This is that first white Vision. Now, this was a cool cover. It was an homage cover to Vision's first appearance, but that's really all it was. Everyone knew it was the first appearance of White Vision, but okay, cool. Well, WandaVision actually produced our White Vision, and since then, this book has just, it's out at the park. Well, you used to be able to buy this. In 2019, someone bought it for $40. $40. The high was at $100. 40 to $100. Well, now the fair market value is at $750. Thanks, WandaVision. And the 90-day average was $820. By the way, there are over 10 examples in, what's that? July of 2021, in which prices were at around $1,400. Yeah, that's a 1,900% increase in just 2 years. Think about that. $40, $1,400. I gotta call that dumb. I don't think it's that big of a key. I don't think that that's a very justified grade at all. I'm gonna have to call that price dumb. It is a 9.8 I would love to have, but it's one I'd maybe want to submit if I had it, just to see if it could get a 9.8. But to spend anywhere close to $1,000 on that book just seems wrong to me. And our final entry on the list is also the most recent book, and that is Something is Killing the Children, number 1, cover A. Nothing special, no ratio variance, just the main cover A. Sales in the beginning few months of 2020, when this came out, were $40. $40 with a couple that pinched up into the $65 range. I actually remembered when that book hit over $100 and I thought everyone was crazy. I wasn't reading the book at the time. Turns out it's a pretty great read, but I think people just got on that boom train a little too crazy. Fair market value right now is $1,300. Recent 90-day sales are at $1,100, and there's a few sales that are at $1,500. Wait a second. This is a heavily produced comic in which there are a lot of 9/8 for, and we got people buying it for $1,500. My friends, that is a 2,054% increase from those first sales in its first few months. 2,054% increase. Guys, I know you love that book. My personal opinion, that is dumb. I am curious to know, though, who of you missed that train of the Something is Killing the Children? Are you sour, or are you just whatever about it? Guys, we had some dumb ones, and we only had 3 that I found to be truly justified. Batman 313, Young Avengers 1, and Savage She-Hulk number 1, that were well below $1,000, that are now $1,000, and I think that's accurate. The rest were dumb or somewhat justified. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Do you think all of these are justified? Do you think that none of them are justified? Do you wish that they would go back to their 2019? Well, that's a stupid question. Do you wish that maybe things were just twice instead of 5, 6 times the amount that they were in 2019? What are some books that you think have some crazy, unjustified gains? Pop it down in the bottom. Also, for everyone that you give me, I'd like to see, if you can, give me a book that has some justified gains. And as always, guys, keep on hunting.